because Prince of Wales, William, of course, has issued a statement today. He's calling for an end to the fighting in Gaza as soon as possible. I have to say there's been a huge reaction and response to this. Many people actually saying that he should never have got involved. He should remain politically neutral. So, as I said, I've got a poll running on Twitter and X now. I've retweeted it so you can see it on Michelle Dubes on my thread. Get involved and tell me whether or not you think he should have issued this statement. But I shall I'm literally sitting next to you. I shall turn to our royal correspondent now, Cameron Walker. First and foremost, how unprecedented is it for a senior royal to issue a statement like this?
It's incredibly rare, and it's incredibly bold of Prince William to do so. I'm getting the sense from a statement he released today, he's trying his hardest to be as neutral as possible. So as you said in your introduction, Michelle, he said he is calling for the fighting in the Israel-Hamas war to end as soon as possible, but he also is calling for the hostages to be released as well. But it's the timing, I think, that's significant here, because there's fears about an escalation in violence as Israeli forces enter Rafah or attempt to enter Rafah. There's an SNP-led Gaza ceasefire motion tomorrow in the House of Commons, and it all sounds very political, doesn't it? Something which some GBNews viewers have really been voicing their concerns over. Some context here. Prince William, of course, is the future king. We live in a constitutional monarchy. He has to be politically neutral. But this afternoon, Michelle, the government's come out and actually supported Prince William for coming out with this statement. A Downing Street spokesperson says his message is consistent with the government's position, and we welcome that intervention. It is important we speak with one voice as a nation. I'm also told that the Foreign Office was fully briefed on that statement.
And many people are saying, but his grandma, of course, the Queen, former Queen, she would never have done something like this. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And Prince William became the first senior royal to visit Israel and the occupied West Bank back in 2018. I'm told by his spokesperson that he's really kept abreast of what's been going on ever since then. Prince Charles, then Prince Charles, now king, of course, followed his son in 2020. So there is some precedent for this. But as you say, I think we're really seeing a clear difference here between Queen Elizabeth II and what the future king is doing.
And lastly, many people, because I've really been looking at a lot of responses to this, many people are saying, well, hang on a second, why didn't he release a statement immediately after October the 7th?
Yeah.
But he did issue something, didn't he?
He did. So his spokesperson released an even stronger statement calling for, saying that Israel is exercising its rights to self-defence and calling out the horrors inflicted by Hamas's terrorist attack. And that's what the quotes are. He didn't repeat the Israel exercising its right to self-defence in the statement he released this afternoon. Clearly, it's become a very polarising issue. But he has clearly been following this. I'm also told, though, that this engagement was meant to happen a few weeks ago. But, of course, the Princess of Wales has had abdominal surgery, so all Prince William's engagements have been rescheduled. So that's why it's come now.
Well, I've got to say, Cameron, I'm looking at my inbox now, and there is not a lot of appreciation for his intervention now. I mean, so many people are saying on this, and I told you I've got a poll running, so get involved there too, but so many people are saying he should have stayed out with it. It's absolutely disgraceful. Victor said, politics has nothing to do with you. We had such great hopes for you, and you've collapsed all of those hopes in minutes.
Yeah, and I think, well, the government clearly is pleased that Prince William has done so, and I'm getting the sense they're almost using him as a bit of an asset here, like the power of soft diplomacy.
I'm not actually sure whether or not that's a good thing. If the government, if you're supposed to be politically neutral and the government of the day is coming out and virtually high-fiving you to some effect, I'm not really sure that is the position he needs to be in.
And also, what difference is it actually going to make on the ground in Gaza and Israel? And I think we'll have to wait and see what the power of Prince William's words will have in foreign land.
Yeah, indeed. Well, for now, thank you very much, Cameron Walker. And if you haven't seen that statement in full, I'll try and pop it back up on the screen so you can have another read of it. But basically, he's saying, as we've just been mentioning, that he wants to see an end to the fighting as soon as possible, desperate need for increased humanitarian support in Gaza, critical aid gets in and hostages are released. And he says, even in the darkest hour, we must not succumb to the counsel of despair. He clings to the hope that a brighter future can be found, and he refuses to give up on that. Alex Dean, your thoughts on this?
I think it's a huge mistake. and I deeply regret it. And I think
what,
that
his
the Prince of
statement?
Wales, yes, making the statement, I think he will live to regret it. With due respect to the Prince and indeed to the government, there is a difference between their roles. The government of the day, and indeed the opposition of the day, and we'll hear about what Labour is doing too, are entitled to, nay, bound to take positions on things. But our monarch and our monarch-to-be is different. And with due respect to politicians, politicians are here today, gone tomorrow. If the monarchy is to survive, it needs to maintain its neutrality on such perspectives. It is fortunate for both sides, when I say sides I mean Westminster and the Palace, that they happen to be in the same position today. But they've set themselves up into a position now where one day they might not be. Well, it may not be about Israel, it may be about another position, maybe about another debate. Once you start taking positions, there is no end to it. People will expect you to take a stance, a moral stance, on everything. And once you start doing that, you will in the end wind up doing something with which the government of the day at Westminster disagrees with you. And that's the height of foolishness. And it's not good for the monarchy.
Tom Buick?
I disagree with that. Prince William, future king, has a constitutional role, not just in our government, but actually overseas realms and territories as well. And I think actually when you look at his statement, and you've made that available, which is great, and you read it, it is absolutely proportionate and moderate. And thinking about the motion that's coming before the House of Commons, obviously amended by the Labour opposition, it's clear the way the wind is blowing on this, which is essentially a call to cease what is a humanitarian disaster unfolding in the Gaza Strip, for international community and the Arab states to come together to find not just a short-term solution, but a long-term one. And therefore, I don't feel like the monarch is taking sides. What he's trying to do, I think, is reflect what is probably the majority public mood in this country and the public mood in the countries where he's also the Prince of Wales.
So let me grab the 5% of that I agree with in the spirit of building bridges. Where the wind is blowing, that bit's right. But it's not the job of the monarchy to blow with the wind. It's not the job of the monarchy to seize the currently popular or political line of the day with which everyone in the UK environment happens at the moment to agree. This is going to be our king one day. What are the people in Israel supposed to think? From not our ally, by the way, what are people in Israel supposed to think when he comes to the throne? At a time when, having exhausted all other options, having sought to negotiate, having sought to use surgical strikes, having sought to do all they can to have the hostages returned to them, having been seized under the most brutal acts by Hamas, they, having exhausted those options, wishing now to go and seek to rescue their own civilians, their own hostages, and effectively, given the timing here, the Prince of Wales, our future king, is saying you're wrong.
Tom?
Alex, where I agree with you, and the motion that's before the House of Commons, as amended, says Israel cannot be expected to cease fighting if Hamas, which is a terrorist organisation, continues with violence, and that the Israelis have the right to the assurance that the horror of 7th of October cannot happen again. Of course, there's two sides in this conflict. One's a democratic government, Israel. One is a proscribed terrorist organisation. Yeah. The hostages, over 130 of them, do need to be released. But I don't think it's stepping over the line of partisanship or impartiality for our future king to reflect a mood which I think is increasingly there in the public.
But let me put this to you, Tom, because there are an awful lot of conflicts going on in this world. There are an awful lot of children currently being killed, whether it's in civil wars or border wars, whatever. So don't you feel a little bit concerned that Prince William is perhaps, I mean, I'm trying not to be crass with my language, but essentially cherry-picking this conflict, this devastation, this civilian death, that all the other ones are carrying in the world right now?
Well, I think that... No, I don't think that, actually. I think he is making a proportionate statement at a time of great humanitarian crisis for the world. And, that's something, of course, he gets from his mother to a large extent. But even on the point about the late Queen, I mean, she did intervene in places like South Africa with the Commonwealth, obviously the Scottish referendum. It is not unprecedented for a monarch to make their feelings known at a time of national crisis.
You know, again, I don't want to trivialise the royals and their role and all the rest of it, but I think back and I thought back to Wembley Stadium. You'll be familiar with the fact that they used to illuminate their arch all the time. So the Ukraine, this conflict, that conflict. Well, as soon as this conflict came along, they then realised that actually this was very complicated. It was creating very strong feelings either side. And then they decided not to illuminate their arch. And I think that taught them quite a strong lesson. think very carefully before you make statements and positioning and all the rest of it on conflicts, etc., when that's not really your modus operandi. Look, I want to talk politics because we just alluded to it then. There is a situation in the House of Commons, isn't there, tomorrow, where there's going to be a vote potentially on the SNP amendment. It's all about whether or not there should be immediate ceasefire. Well, Labour, of course, it's going to be very interesting what happens there. Some people saying Keir Starmer perhaps will face a very strong rebellion. Well, how does he try and head that off? We've just been mentioning a new amendment text has been proposed by Labour. Let's just have a little listen to David Lammy justifying some of these changes.
Keir Starmer and I have been calling for weeks for the fighting to stop, for aid to get in. The situation has evolved, and on the ground it is intolerable, and the Rafah attack cannot go ahead. We are following our Five Eyes partners, Australia, New Zealand and Canada, who a few days ago made it clear that there has to be an immediate humanitarian ceasefire.
Now, I've got to say, Labour have been criticised quite a bit, and this has been a hugely contentious issue for many supporters of the Labour Party. It's really divided the party as to what they're doing. Are they calling for an immediate ceasefire? Are they not? The flip-flops around it, on it a fair bit, as you've just been hearing there. They're now emulating the Five Eyes position, essentially saying immediate ceasefire. How do you think this is going to play out tomorrow, perhaps, and also broadly for the Labour Party, Alex?
Well, on one view, it's smart politics from Starmer. This was the first real bump in the road he'd hit for some time. Polls have reflected he's doing well in general perspectives, but he, of course, lost 10 members of his broader team who said they couldn't put up with his less than wholly critical view of Israel hitherto. So in immediate political terms, it will help him within the Labour Party. But you've got to ask, is that the right thing to prioritise? Is your own internal party dialectic the right thing to prioritise? And it's clear, you can hide behind it being a Five Eyes position all you like. This is internal Labour politics. And I mean, I'm not too embarrassed, but you're a Labour man and I'm not, so you'll probably know a bit more about it than I do. But it seems to me this is not being dictated by what's happening on the ground in Gaza. This is what's happening on the ground in British politics and Starmer's desire to keep his party together.
Tom Buick?
Well, I think internal politics always, to some extent, features in these kind of motions. But what's been actually put down when you read the text is not a one-sided motion. It calls, of course, for a ceasefire, for humanitarian aid to be allowed into Rafah and other parts of Gaza where there's absolutely no functioning healthcare service, any kind of services available to the civilian population. But importantly, and this is what I support, it makes it clear that Israel has the right to receive those hostages back, and that we should not allow the current mood to get in the way of the fact that what happened on the 7th of October was an absolute barbarian act by a prescribed terrorist organisation that beheaded babies and raped women at a music festival. So it's right, I think, that there is a motion that is seeking now to unite the whole of the House of Commons. And it'd be interesting, actually, Alex, whether you would support this. Do you think the government should support this motion?
No, I wouldn't, for at least two reasons. The first is that I disagree with them about calling for a ceasefire, which people only ever think a ceasefire is going to affect one side of a conflict. Hamas won't ever give you a ceasefire. In fact, they've made it very clear they won't rest until Israel doesn't exist any longer. So the idea of calling for a ceasefire when only one side's hands are bound is ridiculous. You're just going to give, at the most generous interpretation, Hamas a chance to redeploy and rearm. At the worst interpretation, you give them more time to hang on hostages, more time to seek to get resupply from Iran and their friends, and then take the attack back to Israel and visit more horror upon them. Israel is asked to back down and back away when it's defending itself, and it's the only country in the world, when having had this kind of thing done to them, is asked not to defend itself robustly and seek to get its citizens back. So I wouldn't vote with the Labour position for that reason. Not least, by the way, I do also note that they are apolitical and B, elected, neither of which Prince William is, so I at least give Labour credit for that. The second reason I wouldn't is claiming that statehood is the inalienable right of the Palestinian people at the end of this statement. Another position, because they're talking about the two-state solution, another position that Hamas doesn't subscribe to because they don't think Israel should exist. They want to wipe Israel off the map.
But I'm assuming you support the two-state solution.
I do as it happens.
So that's the only long-term settlement in the region, isn't it?
No, it isn't. There are several things that can happen, not least given that 20% of Israel's population are Arab and have the best quality of life outside of Arabian royalty of anyone in the Middle East. But the reason that I say no is that they are claiming here, that in effect, with this, the idea of a ceasefire between two parties, that Hamas is a legitimate player, that Hamas is someone who will, with a plain dealer who will abide by a ceasefire, clue they won't, and moreover, that they should then be given a state. There's not been an election in Gaza in 17 years. Their effective representative group, Hamas, is pledged to do nothing but wipe out Israel. So the idea that you should hand statehood to those people, for me, is for the birds.
But you've got 1.5 million people crowded into that tiny area near Rafah. There's a potential offensive being planned by the IDF. What's being called for here is a pause in those hostilities so that humanitarian relief can get across the Egyptian border and via the Mediterranean into that part of Gaza. Why wouldn't you agree that that's something that is needed?
I've explained already. Israel shouldn't be asked to give up when it's succeeding in its objectives and when it's seeking to crush Hamas, which is an objective we should agree with as a prescribed terrorist organisation,
sure. Yeah.
and to get its citizens back. And no other country in the world would be asked to take its foot off the accelerator when it's trying to do those things.